because when we talk about Congress, you have at least 40 members of the House Democratic Caucus and now one Republican who are on the record for at least impeachment proceedings. Then you have Democratic leadership, Pelosi, Nadler, not on the record for it, even after today. Instead, they're saying, well, what they really need next is Mueller to testify. And he made it clear that's not where he's headed.
Now, I hope and expect this to be the only time that I will speak to you in this manner. I am making that decision myself. No one has told me whether I can or should testify or speak further about this matter. There has been discussion about an appearance before Congress. Any testimony from this office would not go beyond our report.
That's Mueller's warning shot. You're not going to get a lot more out of me if you make me testify in public. But in saying that no one's holding him back, he obviously is defending, in effect, his boss, Mr. Barr, and the Trump administration that has been accused, and many people feel credibly accused, of interfering with aspects of this probe, and thus perhaps there was concern they would interfere with Mueller. That's not all. On a narrow point, but an important one, Mueller goes out of his way to thank Barr for his handling of all this.
The Attorney General then concluded that it was appropriate to provide our report to Congress and to the American people. At one point in time, I requested that certain portions of the report be released. The Attorney General preferred to make the entire report public all at once, and we appreciate that the Attorney General made the report largely public, and I certainly do not question the Attorney General's good faith in that decision.
Good faith on the release of the report. As promised, Neil Katyal, former acting Solicitor General of the United States, who wrote those very rules that the special counsel continually cited and invoked as part of the restrictions and the authority that he exercised today. Neil, as always, great to see you. Thank you for being with us on this night. Big picture, what do you think was important about what Mueller said to the public today, given that large parts of it are familiar to you and those who'd read the report?
I think it's a pretty devastating day for President Trump. I think President Trump had hoped that Attorney General Barr's obfuscation of what Mueller actually concluded would carry the day and people would kind of go home and forget. But there's been a drumbeat over the last weeks and leading up to Justin Amash, the Republican member of Congress, is saying, hey, these are crimes and they're impeachable offenses. And so all of that together, I think, has led Mueller to come out today and say, you know, people are spinning this in all sorts of ways, and this is not what I said. And so I disagree a little bit, Ari, with what you just said before about how Mueller gave Barr a kind of clean bill of health and said it was okay, his conduct in general. Mueller used very specific words. He said he didn't mind release. Just on the report. Yeah. Just on the report's release. And, you know, he didn't say anything about how Barr got the obstruction of justice stuff right or anything else.
But he didn't. You know, but let me press you on that, Neil. Let me press you on that, because this is something people at home and I think around the country are wondering. I was talking to various sources, people close to this today about it. There is a view that in the way Mr. Barr released the information about the report and purported to issue a ruling, a judgment on whether or not to charge the president, that is in direct contradiction with what Mueller just said today, that the DOJ can't indict the president. And yet Mueller also, I think, went way out of his way, I'm curious your view, went way out of his way to present some sort of comity, some united front with Barr. He never said, well, I respect him, but we disagree about some of this.
No, it was like a thin ground of comedy only on one issue, which is the public release of the document. And after all, remember, Mueller is the subordinate to Attorney General Barr. The very fact that he's even having a press conference and talking about this suggests to me something pretty serious is afoot. And I mean, we really know this because Mueller did two things today. He plucked out two parts of his report, and sure, they were there before, but this is what he chose to emphasize. Number one, he said, I can't indict a sitting president, even if I wanted to, even if the president was guilty of sin, I couldn't do it. And number two, I can clear him. I could have if the evidence was there. And by the way, the evidence was not there. So those two things together, to me, suggest really a kind of repudiation of what Barr is doing. Certainly, Mueller is saying, look, I can't indict the president, but I can, you know, you can write a report and you all can read it for yourselves and see what it says. I also can't indict Barr. He's my boss, but you can read my report and then compare it to what Barr said. read and draw your own conclusions. And all of this is a setup to Congress, because Mueller is writing this report against the backdrop of the Watergate and Whitewater investigations, which were, after all, turned over to Congress for their investigation. And that is what I think Mueller is saying between the lines today.
Neil, as always, lays it out quite clearly, Gene. As to the point about Congress, let me play a sitting member of Congress who, when pressed on this program, says most of his colleagues haven't read the report. Take a look. If I ask you a question about that, would you try to answer me honestly?
I'll always be. I swear to God.
Well, sir, do you think the majority of members of Congress have read the Mueller report?
No, I don't.
Gene, you take Mueller's aspirations or hopes, you take Neil's breakdown of the purpose of all this, and then you take a Congress that allegedly, according to some, has not widely read the report. And can it handle the nuance that Mueller was resting his argument on today?
Well, we'll see if they can handle the nuance if they would read the report. I mean, what do we pay them for, right? We do pay them to do their jobs, and it's their job to read this report, and they should read it. And then I think members of Congress should ask themselves a question, and this isn't necessarily a legalistic question, but if you're not going to indict. If you're not going to start an impeachment inquiry into Donald Trump, describe the president for whom you would start an impeachment inquiry, right? I mean, a president who abused power, a president who used the instruments of the state to go after his political enemies, a president who lied to the American people all the time. I mean, just describe this hypothetical president who does something that Donald Trump doesn't do all the time.
I'll let that breathe for a second. On a big night, a moment of reflection. Because you put it down, Gene. You say, this report, which Mueller was really just going through the biggest takeaways from this in about 9 minutes. Neil, a more dramatic person, and we've seen some more talkative, loquacious types in law enforcement before, could have done a lot more with it. He erred completely on the side of care and reticence. But to Gene's point, is he saying to Congress, what more do you want me to do? And what greater conduct, abuse of power in that the laws be faithfully executed would you want if you ever were going to get to this point against the sitting president?
Exactly, Ari. And I think there's one key tell, which is Mueller's emphasis on, I can't indict a sitting president because it would be unconstitutional. Every scholar who's taken that view in the Justice Department, when they did, in those two opinions, said the remedy to make sure that a president is above the law is one thing, impeachment. And so when you invoke the I can't indict a sitting president, you are invoking a suite of authorities that says the remedy is a simple one. It is impeachment. I don't mean to say it's a simple process, but that's the remedy that our founders had in mind. And I take Gene's point exactly. I mean, what are you there for? If not to stand up for the rule of law, for a president who doesn't, break the law and, intimidate witnesses, offer pardons, and all the other stuff that's outlined in the Mueller report. There are now 1,000 federal prosecutors, former prosecutors, who've said, if I've read the report, and I would indict all of these things.
I agree with all that was said. I just think we have to add one more point here, which is for Robert Mueller, after writing this report, after doing the 2 years of investigation, after bringing all these indictments, after writing a report in which he explicitly says that there's this other path that, and now today makes very clear, we were never going to consider this from a prosecutorial lens. We were only going to look at this as preservation of evidence and is essentially giving Congress, allowing the other process to go forward as it relates to Trump. In a footnote, he explicitly says, by the way, Congress also has, in addition to impeachment, the question of whether it wants to tighten up these laws. So for Bob Mueller to actually say, I'm done here, I don't want to testify, the book by Mueller is the only testimony you get, is actually to ignore the very thing he lays out in footnote 1091, which is Congress actually has two jobs to do here. Consider impeachment and also consider whether or not it has to consider legislation to make clearer how we have appropriate oversight if a president possibly committed crimes.
You've heard of digging in the crates? Have you ever heard of that?
I don't dig in crates. All right.
It means to look up old records, Flannery. And 1091, thank you, Maya. 1091 says a possible remedy through impeachment for abuses of power would not substitute for criminal liability after a president leaves office. Maya Wiley digging into the footnotes to remind us that Bob Mueller, if you read the report, which he asked you to do today, uses the I word and post-presidential criminal indictment as both things that need to be considered. But as you say, Maya, the question is whether Congress will make him have more of this conversation in public than he wants. They're a co-equal branch. They can make calls that he might disagree with. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.